This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. North Carolina is the third fastest growing state by population in the country and number one for domestic migration, with Charlotte leading the way. And that is why our roads have become congested and why civic leaders have been working on new ways to get around, but not without hitting some snags along the way. I-77 through Charlotte is the most congested highway in the state, particularly from uptown to the South Carolina line. But recently, local officials said no to a toll road through that stretch of the interstate, meaning which was meant to alleviate some of those traffic concerns. That means an immediate loss of $600 million in state highway funds. But for the long term, it means we may have to wait a generation or more before improvements can be made. Meanwhile, improvements are being made to Charlotte's transit system. The North-South Red Line commuter train got the green light, and the East-West Silver Line is also being readied for development, but both projects could take a decade or more before they begin operations. Our experiments with microtransit have met with some success, but may prove too costly to be practical for widespread use, and concerns over safety of operators and passengers on trains and buses continues despite recent drops in crime on transit. Here to talk about it all is WFAE Steve Harrison, who covers transit and transportation and more for us, and Seth LaJeunesse is here. He is a senior research associate at the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center. Good morning. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. Steve, I'm going to start with you in the I-77 toll lanes, which just got voted down weeks ago. For those who have not been following this as closely perhaps as we have, what was the genesis of this idea? What problem were the toll lanes supposed to solve?
Yeah, this goes all the way back to 2007 when the city of Charlotte adopted what they called their hot lanes program. And they decided at the time that to manage congestion moving forward, they weren't going to build, they weren't going to build new free general purpose lanes for everyone. They were going to focus on these express lanes where you pay a toll to get in. The toll changes based on the traffic in the other lanes to keep you moving. The idea at the time was, we want to guarantee motorists a travel time. If we build more lanes, eventually they'll fill up. We want to have for the rest, for the future, forever, these lanes that'll, if you're willing to pay a steep price, will get you to your destination in a fixed, a consistent amount of time.
Hmm. And this, as you said, has been on the book since 2007. If I've done the math right, that's 19 years. So why did this opposition only surface at the very last minute?
Yeah, and I think that's a question that a lot of people, supporters of the toll lanes, are very upset about. A lot of people at the DOT are upset about. But this happens a lot in the public sector, and that there are people working to lay the groundwork for projects for years and years, and then we get to the very end, and people finally they see the designs. They start reading the news coverage, they realize this will impact them. And so, it's kind of like, in a way, the public officials can do 90% of the work. But then the real hard part is the last little bit. That's when people start paying attention. And what happened was there were kind of two things. One, a lot of historically Black neighborhoods near Center City looked at the designs for the toll lanes and realized this was going to be a really big project. It was going to encroach on their neighborhoods. In some places, it was going to tear down homes. So you had a lot of pushback there. And then you had a lot of people who started to look at the toll lanes on I-77 North that opened in 2019. And they look at those and they have helped move traffic somewhat, but people are still in gridlock for a large part of the day. And I think there was people question, like, is this really the best way to go?
We have toll lanes elsewhere. We have toll lanes on I-77 north of Uptown up through Davidson. And we have toll lanes elsewhere in the area. Have they been a success? And if so, define success. What have they accomplished?
Well, the DOT and Centra, the company that manages the I-77 North toll lanes, they point to data that shows that speeds in the general purpose lanes has increased. They point to the number of unique users that are using the toll lanes each month. And it has certainly been a financial success for Centra. They are making a tremendous amount of money. I think they are well over $400 million in total revenue since the toll lanes opened. Remember, this was about a $600 million project, and they have the exclusive on this for another 43 years.
Hmm.
So those are some good points. The negative is that if you're driving up in North Mecklenburg, especially in the areas Huntersville, Davidson, Cornelius, where the I-77 merges, goes down, the free lanes goes down to 2 in each direction. It's still really bottlenecked, and people are sitting in bumper to bumper traffic, and they're frustrated because that road has never been widened with the exception of the toll lane. And so you think like, man, I'm sitting in this traffic now. It's this bad in 2026. What's it going to be like in 2046, 2056? Yeah, people are concerned.
Seth LaJeunesse is with us. He's a senior researcher for UNC's Highway Safety Research Center. This may not be your complete area of expertise, but talk to me about toll lanes. Are these good ideas? Do these things work? Do they relieve congestion? Do they move people? Or do they just move people who can afford to be moved?
Great question, Mike, and I appreciate Steve's reporting on this. I've read a lot of Steve's articles on this subject. From what we understand, yes, in fact, hot lanes or high occupancy toll lanes, as they're termed, can have an effect, especially over the first few years. What tends to happen is it does have a sort of income distribution. Those who can afford use the toll lanes for speedier travel, but then more traffic is generated, usually induced and attracted to those facilities, so that whatever congestion relief you experienced in the beginning usually is eclipsed after just a few years. Um, so
In the toll lanes or in the general purpose lanes?
in the general purpose lanes,
Okay.
yeah, because the word has spread that, oh, more people are using the toll lanes. Maybe it may or may not be true. People report maybe increases in speed, lower travel times. Once word spreads, and this can happen very rapidly, more people will be attracted to using it, and therefore it just recongests. So this is actually something we call fixes that fail, because it just comes back and often gets worse than the initial state.
And this is something that you report, if I understand your analysis correctly. This happens whenever you widen a highway, even with free lanes. Suddenly, it becomes less congested. Word gets around, hey, you can use this, you can get where you're going because it's less congested, and it becomes more congested again. Correct?
Exactly.
So,
That's precisely what happens time and again. Yeah.
is there a solution?
There is no solving congestion. The only way we solve that, I think, is not through expansion, is not through tolling. It's essentially, Steve wants to, I understand, respond to this. It's essentially changing the constellation of options that people have to get around. That's the only way that other cities around the world and the US have addressed congestion in a meaningful way.
Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of induced demand is really real. When you do make a product better, when you add lanes to the interstate, more people do take it. I think that's very clear. I do think, and I do think it's not something you can solve. I mean, I agree totally with Seth on that eventually these lanes are going to fill up. But, I think there's some areas of Charlotte in which they have added capacity to highways, and it has improved traffic flow, and it has improved traffic flow for a significant amount of time. I look at Interstate 85 through Cabarrus County. That used to be just 2 lanes in each direction. You'd get past Concord Mills, and then you would go into this terrible bottleneck. It was widened before COVID to 4 lanes in each direction. And I've never stopped there. We all drive up that stretch all the time. And it just moves every time. I think it's going to keep moving for a significant amount of time. Eventually, it will probably fill up again. But I do think it buys commuters. I will probably be driving it for another 25 years. I think it'll probably be in good shape for the rest of my life. And then, for the next generation, it'll be a problem. But I do think sometimes the fix is longer than just a few years.
So the I-77 stretch that goes through Uptown was kind of stymied recently by this decision by local leaders to say no to the toll lanes. Much of that was fed by opposition from area residents who were concerned about encroachment on neighborhoods on the west side of town. And that's really the only way you can go if you're going to expand or widen a highway in that area, because you can't go into uptown. You have said, Seth, that every transportation investment is a choice, and that as we debate those choices, we should be taking into account fairness, access, time, convenience, environmental impacts, and what kind of city we want to become. Did citizens make that abundantly clear with their opposition to these toll lanes? Did local leaders make the same decision when they rescinded their support that this is not the kind of city we want to become? Seth?
That's a great question. I don't know exactly what the common response is. I'd love to learn more about what the plan is going forward. I know that they rejected this proposal to expand and include those toll lanes. I'd
Steve,
be very interested to hear, yeah, what community members,
what do you,
from their experience, what they
Steve,
would like to see Charlotte become rather than something be imposed upon them,
Steve,
essentially.
what's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a couple data points. One, we go back to November when Mecklenburg voters approved the new transportation sales tax with 60% of the money going to transit. It wasn't a big victory, but it was a victory. And I think that you had people saying, we want an all of the above approach. They wanted more buses, they wanted more trains, they wanted more roads. In terms of 77, I think that I think that this was just a unique project in that it was so big, the footprint was so big. Toll lanes are just they take up more space often than general purpose lanes. The experience with I-77 North has been so negative. And so I think people, in a way, it was you could argue they were kind of the same decision, the transit tax and the opposition to the toll lanes. But I think that there's a path forward to doing something with 77.
We're talking about getting around Charlotte. We'll expand beyond the toll lanes in a little while here on WFAE Charlotte Talks. Seth, as we said, I-77 from uptown Charlotte to the state line is the most congested stretch of highway, I believe, in the state. And if I'm not mistaken, as a research associate at the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center, you don't believe that adding more lanes is necessarily the solution to alleviating congestion. You've just alluded to that. But do you really have choices? Do we have a choice on an interstate highway?
On an interstate highway, no, but certainly on the regional level, we do. Right. It's really a question of how Charlotte would like to grow in the future. If, to Steve's point earlier, if congestion does take a decade to reestablish itself after a widening, do we just continue to do that in ad infinitum? Do we just keep expanding, expanding, expanding? Because what that does is essentially putting all of our resources into road expansion. And we start to say, like Steve said, more than a plurality of people in Charlotte voted for transit improvements. It does seem like the data do tell us that people do want to have a more meaningful option in how they travel, even regionally. So the question is, how do we accomplish that? Where do we secure financing to do that? The focus on a single facility can I often sort of just limit our discussion of exactly how we want to grow.
And why weren't these discussions, Steve, held? And I only have about 30 seconds. Why weren't they held prior to this decision?
Well, I think one of the things with 77 was that it really sprang up on a lot of people. The maps were released in November 2025. Some people felt like they should have been put out earlier. And then, boom, we got to this point at crunch time where we had to make a decision.
I want to talk about options, and I want to talk about I-77 being a pass-through. It's not a local road. It's a national road. We'll talk about that when we come back at Charlotte Talks. It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about getting around Charlotte, all the options that are becoming available to us or not becoming available to us, as the case may be. Steve Harrison reports on all of this for WFAE News. He's with us, along with Seth LaJeunesse, senior researcher for the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. We've been talking about options, and we're going to talk about options, particularly on non-interstate highways, as we go through the program. But the option on I-77, which is the most congested highway we have in the state, seems to be these toll lanes or widening these lanes in some way. There was a suggestion, Seth, to elevate the toll lanes. That became an option. Some neighborhoods surrounding the highway suggested burying the lanes so they would not be as obtrusive and so that they could create parks and ways to connect the west side to the uptown area by walking and biking over the interstate. Of those, widening the highway, elevating the highway, extra lanes, burying the extra lanes, which is the most practical, which would solve the congestion problem, or would any of them solve the congestion problem on I-77, Seth?
Uh, well, it depends on what time scale you're talking about, Mike, with solving the congestion problem. I don't think over a decade period we'd probably solve much of anything with that. Boston did that with their Big Dig project. If you may have recalled that, they buried a highway, and essentially it's extremely congested today. Um, I don't know. It would really have to look, we'd have to look at the environment, and you'd probably want to consider the environmental and the social impacts of the designs and then come together with people, with through community engagement to understand which would be the preferable option if that were the only option were to expand and
But there are
include
moments,
tolling.
there are times when I-77 and it's in, sunny weather with no rain and everything should be moving, and yet it stops. It's not even rush hour. It just stops. And that's today. By 2050, the traffic on I-77 is predicted to increase by 25%. What does that mean for a city and for interstate highway travel through a state? What does that mean? And what does it mean for transportation and business and trucking? Steve.
Yeah, that number you cited, the traffic increasing to 200,000 cars by 2050 comes from the DOT.
Right?
I'm not so sure that is actually going to happen. And I was looking at some of the data going into the show. Really on 77, that if you go back, the DOT publishes traffic counts on their website. If you go back to 2002, 23 years ago, the traffic on 77 was just as bad or worse than it is today. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean improvements need to be made. It's the traffic is terrible, and it was terrible then. But I don't know where you're going to get an extra 40,000 cars from. I mean, in part because the road's just so crowded today, you can't really, there's just no room to add any more cars. So I don't know if we're going to hit 200,000. I mean, I'm skeptical of that. But anyway, setting that aside, I mean, it's really congested. There is some solution that needs to happen, whether that's widening or transit or something, but it is a kind of an intolerable place to be if you're a Charlotte driver.
Seth, as we'll talk about on city streets, you can add more buses, you can add bike lanes. In some areas, if the money is available, you can add light rail, which gets people out of their cars. But that doesn't really work on an interstate highway where a lot of the traffic is merely passing through. They're not locals, although locals do use it. And unlike building new neighborhoods that are more friendly to walking and bicycling, which takes traffic off the road, that will never happen on an interstate highway. It's at cross purposes with it. So, what do we do?
I think Steve was heading in a certain direction, which is the fact that this is something that's been with us for quite a while. And it seems like every generation there's a new crisis that emerges. Like, what are we supposed to do with this congestion? Um, for this, I think it would be wise to start looking at alternative routing in the region. This is going to be a sort of generational project, I think. So yes, you can certainly look at the facility of I-77 and maybe widen that, right? But also look at, are there other ways that we could construct something maybe parallel to some other facility? There has to be a look at what we do in terms of other options, not only other modes of travel, but other routes as well. We have to start thinking about these things, right? And I think tolling is an interesting concept because that's at least capturing some of the costs that are associated with just passing through that
But
area.
we just said no.
I know that's true, but that I think still has to be on the discussion. I think it will be recurring.
When these plans were released last November, people began to look at them, Steve, as you mentioned, and then we get right down to the wire, and they put a moratorium where they put a 30-day or a 60-day pause on things, and NCDOT held conversations with area stakeholders and neighborhood leaders and people who learn more about these, and we still said no. Did they present alternative plans after hearing what the neighborhood complaints were before we said no? Or were we voting on the same project that initially proposed?
Yeah, I mean, yes or no. In a way, it was the same project. The scope did not change. It was still two toll lanes in each direction. You just, there's only so much you can do if you're keeping that footprint. If you're keeping that amount of concrete, there's only so much you can do. The DOT tried to make some cosmetic fixes. They were going to put a concrete cap over part of 77 near Uptown and put a park over it.
Yeah.
The idea to like reconnect the west side with Uptown. So they were really trying to improve this existing project. But at the end of the day, they weren't scaling it back. They weren't saying we're going to go from 4 new toll lanes to 2. And when you keep the same design, you're really straitjacketed. There's not a whole lot you can do.
So, in the aftermath of this rejection by the Charlotte, what's it called? I can never remember. The
CRTPO.
Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, CRTPO. The Observer reported that in the aftermath, residents who could have been impacted by the project were excited about a more collaborative step forward. Is there one? I have not heard it.
And we'll see what comes of it. The city of Charlotte has budgeted $300,000 to partner with UNC Charlotte on a study for alternatives, kind of a holistic look at I-77 and other transportation. That I assume will take 6 months or a year. I've written about the possibility of just saying, let's look at the worst 5.5, 6 miles of the highway between Nations Ford Road and I-277, the John Belk Freeway, adding one free lane in that area. It would be much cheaper. You wouldn't have to tear down as many bridges. You would get a fair amount of traffic relief. I mean, eventually, at some point in the future, it's gonna fill up again. But I think that would be the cheapest and easiest way forward.
There is a significant amount of traffic from I guess, I-85 through Uptown, but then the bottleneck really appears to be at 277 South, the John Belk Freeway. Would widening the highway at that point cause the kind of detrimental effects on West Side neighborhoods that it would through the Uptown area? Is that an option to start widening it there?
So if you did that idea, if you look at 77 through around Trade Street, you wouldn't have to do anything. The highway is already 8 lanes total. So McCrory Heights, Biddleville would not be impacted at all. Now, if, like you said, Mike, if you go and add 1 lane in each direction south of the John Belk, you have some impacts. The biggest would be that bridge over West Boulevard on I-77 through Wilmore. I think you could probably do it without demolishing any homes. I think it's possible, where the old plan, that was going to be the biggest impact right there through Wilmore. When you added 4 lanes, it was going to really take out a lot of homes. You would see some impacts, but I think they would be a lot less.
The state has said that no future highway construction will occur unless it is a toll road, and the state has limited the amount of money that can be spent on a single highway project to be $600, I think, million over 5 years. Yet, I-85 is being widened through Gaston County. It will not be a toll road, and it is budgeted to cost $1.5 billion. The I-26 connector in Asheville is moving forward at a cost of $1.8 billion. The state is footing the bill there, and there will be no toll lanes. Explain this. Why are we stuck with toll lanes?
Yeah, the DOT. So the reason is, in those divisions, the DOT is split into divisions, and their metropolitan planning organizations said we don't want tolls. So therefore, the DOT toll lanes aren't an option. So they say, okay, well, how can we build this? And so what they did was they divided these projects into segments over a 5-year period so they could access that $600 million multiple times. And so in the Asheville Road, for instance, this I-26 connector, they counted I-240. Now, I-240 is this little loop that goes around Asheville. They counted that as its own corridor, so they could hit $600 million there. So there are ways, in this debate in Charlotte, it was always portrayed as like, this is the only way to widen I-77. And then you kind of, Mike, to your point, you look at these other parts of the state and you're like, wait a minute, how are they doing it? And I think that's going to be an important conversation for Charlotte planners to have going forward, is to look at these other cities.
A, who was saying this is the only way we can do it? And B, have we not just told them we don't want toll lanes?
Well, the people who were saying it was the only way, the DOT was saying it's the only way. And I think kind of what they meant was it's the only way to do this toll lane project, because this is what you asked for. So, the city in 2007 said, this is what we want. And they said, okay, well, if that's what you want, this is the only way. And so it kind of, the argument of this is the only way kind of shifted from this is the only way to do toll lanes to this is the only way to widen the highway overall. And it became kind of a game of telephone, and it was started to be repeated by the Business Alliance, city council members who were in favor of it, et cetera, et cetera. And they were, became this idea of like, all right, well, if you're saying no to this, there's absolutely nothing we can do. And I just don't think that was an accurate representation.
So now we're losing 600 million, I think it's $600 million in state highway funding because of this decision to scrap this planned toll road. What would it take to get that money back, to start spending it around I-277 and 77 and begin widening that stretch of highway south to the state line? What would it take?
You'd have to redesign the project into segments. You would get a cost estimate for that, and then it would be submitted and scored under the 2016 STI law. That's how all highway projects in North Carolina move forward. It would get a score, and then if it scored well enough, and presumably it would, I mean, if we've been told this is the absolute worst highway in the state, the most critical project, presumably it would still score well. You would put it in the STIP. Sometime it would, and hopefully get funding in the 2030s. Then you would start slowly moving down the highway and advancing it in segments, just like they did in Gaston County.
But Seth, this thing, I don't know how familiar you are with what we're talking about. Are you in Charlotte? I don't even know.
No, I'm based in Carborough, actually.
Okay, so the I-77 really bottlenecks around the John Belk Freeway. It bottlenecks again around Clanton Road. It bottlenecks again a couple of exits down on Tyvola. And it doesn't seem to have any apparent reason except that the highway kind of curves a little bit at that point. So if we were able to widen it beyond 277 South and put in some extra lanes that are not toll lanes, is it a fool's errand? Because as you have said several times in this broadcast, when you widen the road, initially congestion is relieved. Word gets around that congestion has been relieved. More people use it. Congestion resumes.
Largely, yes, Mike, I would say. The reason is
Great.
because these are very costly projects. You were talking about the cap, right, in the North Carolina, the 600 million for the question is, what can we do with 600 million too for other projects? What could we do, over the course of a decade? Because honestly, the way Steve was laying out I think that's very optimistic to put it in now in 2026 STI. To have that built even within a decade, I think would be pretty optimistic. And within that time, Charlotte added from 2015 to 2025, I think it was around 100,000 housing units. So land uses can change quite rapidly over that time frame, meaning there's going to be more put on the system. So the question again is, where do we want to devote our dollars to get the best benefit in terms of people's mobility, however they get around?
So Malcolm Graham, Charlotte City Councilman Malcolm Graham, whose district would have been affected, Steve, by these toll lanes, voted to rescind support of Charlotte City Council. But he's also said that, quote, at some point, we're going to have to address congestion on I-77 South. It's not if, it's when, and it's not just when, it's how. Has he shared any thoughts on that?
He hasn't in any detail. Like I said, the city is going to partner with UNC Charlotte to try and take a look at these options and say, what can we do? I think that's the next step. So I'm not sure of the time frame on that. I assume at least 6 months, maybe a year. I think council is going to wait for that study, and then you would go to CARPO, the regional planning organization, and kind of make a motion and advance this and ask the DOT to do X, Y, and Z.
And Shannon Binns with Sustain Charlotte also agrees that the current situation is intolerable, but that we need to, quote, explore all the ways to reduce congestion that does not involve something as simplistic and outdated as just widening the road. Okay, I only have seconds here, but is that naive?
What Sustain Charlotte, one of the things they have proposed for 77, they want to see the shoulder of the lane improved a little bit and reserved for express buses. That would make the express buses more favorable. One of the problems with that, the express bus that serves 77, the 82X from Rock Hill, it's being discontinued at the end of July or end of June because there's not enough ridership and Rock Hill doesn't want to pay for it. So that's over.
We're talking about our traffic congestion problems on Charlotte Talks on WFAE. It also seems to me that the buses are stuck in the same traffic that cars are stuck in. Am I wrong? Is there a solution to that, Seth? I mean, we're talking about getting people out of their cars. You put them on a bus that eliminates X number of cars, but the bus is still stuck behind the other cars.
Indeed, yeah, the buses still have to operate in traffic. They can carry up to 40 people, however, right, as opposed
Yeah.
to one or two, which in personal vehicles.
So when Charlotte took its transportation plan to the state to get approval to levy this 1% sales tax, which starts this summer, Senate Leader Phil Berger and others rejected it, and they said it was too rail-centric and it didn't focus enough on roads. So, Seth, we changed the plan. We lost some rail lines, which ticked a lot of people off. Now voters have said no to this major road improvement in the absence of options that would put people on mass transit and get them out of their cars. It seems we've canceled all the options. Have we?
It does seem like you're in a bind there, right? Like you just laid it out, Mike. I think what needs to happen is a reconvening at the table to say exactly where do we want to be headed? What do we want to be looking like? How do we want to be moving around this region exactly? In what way, right? Because honestly, and then think about the feasibility. I'm glad to hear that there's a study being conducted because that will be necessary for people to just imagine what it's going to be like in the future. Because right now, yeah, if we devote all allocations to widening roads, you foreclose all other options when we do this.
And yet our state leaders have pretty much said, roads, roads, forget all the other stuff. People want to drive their cars. They may not be wrong, but the solution may not be right. We have to take a break. We'll come back with more in a moment at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with Steve Harrison, WFAE's politics and transportation reporter, and Seth LaJeunesse is here. He's a senior researcher with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. We're going to expand this conversation out beyond the I-77 project. Charlotte, Seth, is taking part in this Vision Zero 2030 plan, which is set to, and it's a national, and actually it's an international program, if I'm not mistaken. And the plan is to reduce traffic-related deaths to zero by 2030. That's just 4 years from now, 3.5 actually. Is that a realistic goal? What would it take?
Is it realistic? I'm not sure. It would take quite a seismic change in the way we do business with building our roads, our land uses, and our vehicles. So it is more of a strategy. It's more of an aspiration, but it's this idea, this sort of moral statement, I think, that a lot of communities are making that say no one should be gravely or fatally harmed on our roads.
But you can probably, I know that you say that road design shapes how we drive. We are intuitively informed about how that road looks, and so we'll drive faster than we perhaps should or slower than perhaps we should because it just feels different to us. And you can design a road if you're building a city from scratch. We live in a city that has been designed over the 20th century to be very car-centric. And we've shaped driver expectations. Can you change them? I mean, it would cost a fortune to redesign every road in this city.
I think you can. History does suggest we can change drivers' perceptions, certainly through road design. Reducing the number of lanes, if that's feasible in a location, that can have a major impact on
But isn't that
speed.
going to increase congestion and make people want to go when they can go as quickly as they can possibly go?
You know what's interesting is that if you do reallocate space on the roadway, Mike, providing maybe bike lanes in addition to car travel lanes, you do see basically you don't see what you would expect, right, in terms of congestion. There's something that's the inverse of induced demand, and it's called traffic evaporation. That's something we've seen a number of places.
Explain that.
A case example in the US actually comes from New York. If you recall when they pedestrianized Times Square, there was a lot of concern about the roads surrounding and the streets surrounding Times Square were going to be just filled with traffic.
Hmm.
In fact, when they pedestrianized Times Square, traffic in the nearby streets went down by 11% immediately, and it stayed that way.
Because
Um,
people
because
just
people were
avoided it?
generally just avoiding the area. That's what generally happens. And they were using other modes. They do switch, in these kind of circumstances. I see, Steve, you wanted to say something though.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, in the transportation plan that was approved by voters back in November, 40% of the money goes to roads. And I think a lot of Republicans in Raleigh saw that 40% number as this like, okay, Charlotte is going to increase road capacity. We're going to add more lanes. That's how people get around. And really, the city has a very different idea for that money. I mean, most of the projects that they are going to do are kind of what Seth talked about, redesigning intersections, sidewalks, trying to make things safer. There's not a whole lot of money for new road capacity. So the transportation sales tax money is trying to get the city closer to that Vision Zero ideal. I mean, it's not going to happen. It's by 2030. That's just unrealistic, and it won't happen. But the city is moving in that direction to try and say, we're going to do bike lanes, we're going to do sidewalks, we are going to, in some places, take out lanes. So that is the city's plan. And, like I said before, I'm guessing there are a lot of Republicans in Raleigh, if they took a deep look at it, would scratch their heads a bit. But that's the way Charlotte's moving.
This just seems counterintuitive to me. There's X number of people, and they need to go from point A to point B every single day in their lives. And you're saying we should take lanes away, add bike lanes. I never see anybody in the bike lanes, by the way, anecdotally. I just don't see how this works. Why this doesn't increase congestion. Yeah, people may avoid these areas, but they have to go somewhere. So where do they go? Don't they increase? If you reduce congestion by taking away lanes in one area, and so people don't use that road as much, they have to go someplace. Aren't you increasing it elsewhere at the same time, Seth?
Incidentally, no. And this is why we do call it traffic evaporation.
So where are these people going? How do they get to where they need to
Usually,
be?
just like induced demand, where people will switch from riding the bus to driving because of the new capacity, people will then do the inverse. Again, if the facility is significant enough and they need to get around, they will find ways to get around. It's kind of like a homeostasis, right? So if we find that this is just not what it used to be, this road for driving, maybe I'll try a bike. Maybe I'll get on the bus. This is what we generally see as mode switching,
Do we have
route switching.
empirical evidence, Steve, that that is in fact happening here where we've done this, like on East Boulevard and other places? Is it happening?
I think there are some roads inside Charlotte, like very close to Center City, where they have put roads on road diets where they take out a lane. East
Right.
Boulevard, I think, is definitely one. Parkwood, I think, is another. Those are
Seventh
some
Street.
areas that were kind of in a way overbuilt. And so you've had a lot of like suburban traffic move away. You take out a lane, I don't think it's made any difference in terms of congestion. It's made it a nicer road. I think the big struggle in Charlotte has been over the last 10 years getting people to use public transportation. We've just had a real collapse in the amount of riders. And if you even look back just very recently, we had gasoline at about $4.25 a gallon in May. Transit ridership here went down. So we
Hmm.
we had this like it's gas has been really expensive. That historically has been the time when people get out of their cars and say, "I'm tired of paying. I'm going to get on transit." And we saw about a 5% decline year over year.
So let's talk about transit. One of the things we lost when we changed our transit plan to please Raleigh was much of the light rail portion of the Silver Line, which was scheduled to run east to west from Matthews to Belmont in Gaston County. And now much of it is going to be bus rapid transit, which has really made some people, particularly in Matthews, very upset. Rail is fixed. And as the Blue Line has shown, it creates development, and that development often creates congestion. Buses can move wherever the people are, and it doesn't create the kind of development that light rail does, and it doesn't increase the tax base. So, can this puzzle be solved, Steve?
I think I think it's going to be with the rail portion. I think it's going to be very interesting and important to focus forward on how much the red line costs, because that by law has to go first before anything else is built. At some point, I think by the end of this decade, we will have a good idea of the final cost of that. And then the key moment is, will the federal government contribute to the construction costs? That's a really big deal.
Hmm.
If the feds don't agree to fund it, which the feds didn't do that for a commuter train, proposed commuter train in the Triangle, then I think we're kind of dominoes start to fall. It makes it harder to build other trains. It makes it harder to build the Silver Line. So sometime in the early 2030s, we're going to have an idea of just how much train we can build. I'm skeptical whether the Silver Line from the airport all the way to Bojangles, whether there's going to be enough money to do that.
Hmm. And you did extensive reporting, Steve, on the Red Line commuter train has been given the go-ahead. And you pointed out that since the toll lanes on I-77 North had opened, it would now be faster to drive from Davidson to Uptown on I-77 than it will be to take the Red Line when the Red Line is up and running. But when it is up and running, will it take a significant number of cars off the road, or do we know?
We have not gotten ridership projections so far on that. Today, CATS operates 4 express buses that go from North Mecklenburg to Uptown, and they get to use those toll lanes. So they get to go really fast. They get to bypass traffic. There's about 500 people a day who use them, which is the best ridership CATS has for its express buses. That is really the bread and butter of their express bus system, or those ones that go up and down I-77. But this is the big but. The ridership on those is way, way down than it was a decade ago when we didn't have express toll lanes. And I think a big part of that is the societal change. People just don't have to go into the office like they used to.
So, if I understand things correctly here, Seth, one of the options that experts recommend for improving traffic flow, obviously, is mass transit. And one of those options, the subset of that, is micro transit. Charlotte has been running an experiment with micro transit in certain areas. It's not unlike calling an Uber. So, how does that help? Because this puts a vehicle carrying few people on the road? Why isn't it just another impediment to traffic flow? Seth.
It's a fair question. Depending on the structure of it, if it's bringing people from where they are to where they want to be on a fixed route, it could be quite effective. And if it's coming at a frequency, so basically, whenever we think of things that any mode that's operating outside of vehicles, we have to ask, is this going to provide the benefit at or even better than the motor vehicle? Most cases, the answer is probably no. So the question is this a timely? Does this come when it needs to come? Does it go where I need to go? And is the experience comfortable enough for me to continue using this? It can, if all those are provided for enough people. So we have to really think about the quality of the routes, where they're going, where they're coming from. And I know agencies do a really good job of understanding where people do want to go. But yes, they are certainly part of the, we were discussing sort of the all of the above options, kind of, constellation.
Where CATS has been operating these microtransit vehicles, Steve, what has the result been? How successful have they been?
Yeah, they have one micro zone transit today that covers almost all of North Mecklenburg. That was their pilot program that started back in February 2025. They've been pretty happy with the results. I think in the last month they crossed 6,000 rides for the month. It is for some people, I mean, it is a great deal because it is heavily subsidized. It's a $2.20 ticket to go, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 miles to go to the grocery store, go to a doctor's appointment. I think if you are elderly, if you are disabled, if you don't have a car, you're low income, it is a fantastic service.
Is it cheaper than Lyft, cheaper than Uber?
Oh, I mean, by far, yeah.
Yeah.
For $2.20, that same
Right.
Uber trip might take 10 or 15, 20.
The Better Bus Plan put forward by CATS calls for an increase of 50% in available bus service and for providing 18, if I'm right about this, 18 microtransit zones for on-demand rides. But the plan for both, you say, may already be over budget. How over budget?
Yeah, I looked at the first budget that CATS put out for the upcoming fiscal year that kind of goes out into the future. And I do think, and interim CEO Brent Cagle, he feels like they could do it, but he agreed with me that costs are going to be a real problem. I mean, historically in CATS and all transit agencies, operating costs they're really expensive. They go up every year significantly, usually more than the cost of inflation. And so I think that there is going to be a challenge for CATS to do 50% bus service, to do a total of 19 microtransit zones, to improve 2,000 bus stops. It's going to be hard without dipping into some of the rail money that is set aside for trains, which legally they can do. You can take rail money and put it into buses. You can't take bus money and put it into trains. So I think that's going to be something to watch around 2030 is, can this be done?
Clearly, Seth, the solution to congestion is to get people out of their cars and provide other options for getting around. Among them would be buses and trains, and there seems to be a resistance on the part of the General Assembly and perhaps the federal government to fund trains. And there are people who say, well, that the trains are the technology of the 19th century. But there is a resistance in this town, at least, to buses, to riding the bus. Is that unique to Charlotte? Is that because our system isn't sufficient enough to support good bus ridership? What's the story here in your opinion?
From what I understand, Mike, around buses is that the service, the frequency at which they come is probably the most important variable. If you miss a bus and you have to wait another half hour even for a bus, that could be extremely disruptive. So that's kind of critical. You have to have sufficient. So there's going to be growing pains if you don't have sufficient frequency of buses on the most used routes, then it's simply not going to work very well, and people aren't going to ride it. It's sort of a downward spiral, right? So you have to get up to a level of service, and that it could be costly, to Steve's point. But in order to make this, again, kind of competitive with the vehicle and attract more people to use it, it has to be frequent, clean, comfortable. I mean, it's just the reality.
We're talking about transit options here this morning on Charlotte Talks on WFAE. One of the things that CATS did is try to improve the reliability and the frequency of buses, particularly on certain routes where it has been a problem. But there's also this perception, Steve, because of a series of recent events, that riding the trains, riding the buses isn't safe. And there was an article in the Observer over the weekend about this. The paper analyzed federal and local data to find out if our light rail system is significantly more dangerous than other systems, and they discovered it is not. But they did find that violence against drivers and operators occurs more frequently here than the national average. And was that before CATS took steps to increase safety?
I'm not sure about the timeline. I can say that interim CEO Brent Cagle has made safety a huge priority. The upcoming budget has another $10 million for safety. They're taking it very seriously. I think the key metric isn't so much how we compare with other transit systems, is how Charlotteans remember transit from, say, 2010 to today, and their experience riding the Blue Line when it first opened 15, 20 years ago to what it's like today. And I think that's kind of the key metric. And I think a lot of people began to feel, even before the murder of Irina Zarutska, that it was a less enjoyable product, that there were more people riding without tickets, et cetera. They didn't feel as safe. And I think that's been a problem.
But we should point out that despite perceptions, CMPD reports a 69% reduction in violent crimes on the Blue Line year to year. I have 10 seconds. Would the same be true of buses?
I wish I could tell you that one, Mike.
Okay. Topic for another day. Steve Harrison from WFAE News, Seth LaJeunesse, senior researcher with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. Thank you all for the hour.
Thank you.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer is Gabe Altieri. The senior producer is Sarah D'Elia. The producer is Chris Jones.